Glad you could make it with us yet again on our news desk. This is QTV. The headlines. A government has paid back £2.7 million to the UK government believed to have been misappropriated at the Ministry of Community Development and Social Welfare. Justice Minister Given Lubinda says the bill to reform the Public Order Act will be presented to Parliament for enactment in February 2019. The Zambia Congress of Trade Unions ZCTU has condemned the decision by government to increase fuel prices. Here now is the news in detail. Government has paid back the £2.7 million meant for social cash transfer to the UK government through the Department for International Development DFID. Special Assistant to the President for Press and Public Relations, Amos Chanda, has disclosed this during a media briefing. Mr. Chanda says this follows a request made by DFID for the money to be paid back. He says the money, which was paid back on Monday, has not been gotten from government coffers but from where it was being kept in a government account. The UK government recently laid 3 other donor countries in suspending aid to the government over the alleged misuse of funds meant for the social cash transfer at the Ministry of Community Development. Meanwhile, President Edgar Lungu has with immediate effect appointed Southern Province Police Commissioner Boni Kapeso as Deputy Inspector General of Police in charge of operations. Mr. Chanda says Mr. Kapeso takes over from Malcolm Mulenga, whose contract has not been renewed. He says Diamond Likashi has since taken over as Southern Province Police Commissioner. Justice Minister Given Lubinda says the bill to reform the Public Order Act will be presented to Parliament for enactment during the legislative sitting in February 2019. Mr. Lubinda says government will begin by holding multi-stakeholder meetings in all the 10 provinces for the review of the Public Order Act beginning the 3rd week of October 2018. He has told Parliament in a ministerial statement that the objective of the meetings is to sensitize stakeholders on the current provisions of the Public Order Act and to solicit views on the areas of proposed reform. Mr. Lubinda says the Committee of Interparliamentary Union of the World Organization of the National Parliaments has offered to facilitate a workshop on the review of the Public Order Act for various stakeholders. He says government has since welcomed the gesture and the workshop is scheduled to take place immediately after the provincial public consultative meetings. He states that the outcomes of the consultative meetings and the workshop will be the making of recommendations on the areas of reform of the Public Order Act in order to facilitate the drafting process before enactment. Mr. Lubinda has since urged opposition political parties to make submissions on reforms they would want to see in the Public Order Act.
The objective of these meetings is to sensitize stakeholders on the current provisions of the Public Order Act and to solicit stakeholder views on the areas of proposed reform. Mr. Speaker, you may wish to note that the Committee of the Interparliamentary Union of the World Organization of National Parliaments has offered to facilitate a workshop on the review of the Public Order Act for various stakeholders, which include parliamentary committees, relevant line ministries, political parties, the police, the Human Rights Commission, Law Association of Zambia, and other relevant stakeholders for exchange of experiences and practices of other countries. Government has welcomed the gesture, and the workshop is scheduled to take place immediately after the provincial public consultative meetings. The outcome of this process is anticipated to be the making of recommendations on the areas of reform of the Public Order Act in order to facilitate the drafting process before final enactment by this Parliament.
The Zambia Congress of Trade Unions ZCTU has strongly condemned the decision by government to increase fuel prices. In a statement issued to Q News, ZCTU Secretary General Cosmas Mukuka says the increase in fuel prices will have a spillover effect on the cost of essential goods and services with process in transport, electricity, food and other essential goods expected to increase soon. Mr. Mukuka says workers have to pay more to commute to work and back and will soon have to pay more for food and other consumer goods. He says this means that they will have less to spend, causing the demand for consumer goods to drop further, which will in turn lead to job losses. He states that the workers and the poor are already overburdened by the introduction of additional taxes, which have impacted negatively on real incomes. Mr. Mkuka adds that productivity will be affected by the increase because the business world will blame the high cost of fuel for reducing production. He says that the ZCTU fears that some companies may resort to retrenchment of workers as a way of cutting down on production costs, thereby worsening the already high levels of unemployment in the country. Mr. Mkuka further states that ZCTU is worried by the high increase in fuel prices because producers of goods and services will pass on the increase to consumers. He has since urged all ZCTU affiliates to start pushing demands in salary increments with employers in order to cushion members from economic hardships. Minister of Finance Margaret Manakatwe says government is being bullish with mining sector because it wants the sector to contribute more to Zambia's gross domestic product (GDP). Speaking during the Africa CEO Forum organized in conjunction with the Swiss government in Lusaka, Mrs. Manakatwe says this is why government is encouraging new investments in the mining sector. She says there is still great potential in Zambia's mining sector, but that government wants to see more value addition to the country's mineral resource. Mrs. Manakatwe states that to this effect, she has in the 2019 national budget reduced corporate tax from 35% to 15% for mining firms that venture into value addition.
We're looking at the area of mining, still great potential, but we want to see value addition in this sector. That's why you see me go from 35% to 15% of corporate tax if you value add on your copper, on your cobalt, on your manganese and everything else. We are bullish about this sector. That's why we're encouraging investment into this sector, especially new investment. Our mining regime as well has been more tailor-made now to ensure that we can see greater contribution of the mining sector to GDP, rather than at the moment where agriculture is contributing more. Wholesale and retail trading are contributing more to GDP. We've got to make sure that we've got equilibrium where the largest sector is actually contributing more.
And Midland Health Services Chief Executive Officer Mohamed El Sahili has wondered why Zambia cannot in future host the Africa CEO Forum. Dr. Sahili says the fact that Zambia is open for business and investment, it should lead by example in sharing its experiences, failures, challenges and opportunities at the continental level. He states that the Midland Health Service Group believes Zambia is the economic hub for the region.
That Zambia is open for business, it's open for investment, and we have to give the example. We have to share our success stories, we have to share our failures, we have to share our challenges, the opportunities, because we do believe as a group that Zambia is the economic hub for the region. This is the beauty. Otherwise, we wouldn't be investing here, and these are not words. I mean, everyone knows about our investments in Zambia. And we are very proud of this investment. But we are not the only one that are successful. I can see many of the colleagues who are our suppliers, our partners, with whom we share values, people that we highly like. Sometimes we fight with our bankers. I'm sorry for that. But I know that this is for the best of Zambia. So if we really believe in Zambia, this country that has welcomed us all, whether we are Zambians or not, I'm not someone who believes in nationalities. I'm sorry to say that. But if we really believe in this country, why we don't take those success stories? What did Zambia offer us? It offered us a real example of women empowerment.
People's Alliance for Change, PSC President Endiford Banda says the 2019 national budget does not address the real issues affecting the people. Mr. Banda has told AQ News that he expected the to see a budget that focuses on the growth of the economy and not what was presented. He says the government is out of touch with the people when it comes to issues that are affecting them. Mr. Banda notes that the 2019 budget focuses on debt repayment at the expense of growing the economy. He adds that the PSC expected the government to give assurance to the donor community and investors that it is doing everything possible to deal with the misappropriation of funds and other issues of concern to the donors.
The government is not in touch, with the people. when it comes to a number of issues that affect them. And some of the things that we've noticed also, the budget has not addressed the issues head on. If you talk about the depreciation of the kwacha, the budget just says that the depreciation of the kwacha was caused by the fact that a lot of people have been importing fuel, when that's not the fact. The fact is that the kwacha started depreciating when a lot of donors withdrew their aid. So what we expected in the budget was an assurance, to the donor community, to the investors out there, to let them know that the government was doing everything possible to ensure that the misappropriations of funds and all other issues that were raised over the social cash transfer are being dealt with head on, because that would give confidence to the people to bring back the money in the economy. The government.
The Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, is opposed to the enactment of legislation that gives Parliament the authority to approve the contraction of all public debt by government. Governance advisor Isaac Mwanza says YALI holds the view that allowing Parliament to approve borrowing will stifle the work of the executive. Mr. Mwanza states that it is therefore important that the nation thinks through before enacting the Budgeting and Planning Act into law. He has told Q News that YALI feels that Zambia should be in tandem with other countries where the responsibility to approve and contract public debt lies with the executive.
This is one good piece of legislation that we must be able to think through as a nation and enact. But at the same time, we are thinking that when you are going to enact the Budget Planning and Debt Act, which will compel government to go to Parliament every time they want to borrow money, it means that we are going to stifle the way the executive is going to be working. And so we must approach certain of these legislation with a bit of sensitivity, because the issue of debt contraction lies with the executive. Any other country, it lies with the executive. And so when you are going to have every other small amount you are going to Parliament to get an approval, it means that government might not function at the end of the day. The executive might not function at the end of the day. So we think that the ruling party, the members of Parliament in the ruling party must scrutinize at the Budget Planning and Debt Act budget, which will be presented to Parliament, because it is going to take away a lot of power from the other side, and it will actually not allow them to maneuver around whenever they want to borrow for something. This is
the Patriotic Front government has been challenged to admit that it has failed to properly run the country's agricultural sector. UPNDA Chairman for Rural Development, Mono Mapani, says this is evident from the inefficiencies being exhibited by government in running the agricultural sector. Mr. Mapani says the inability by governments to deliver farming inputs to farmers on time, year in, year out, coupled with a delay to pay farmers for the crop supplied to the Food Reserve Agency FRA, amounts to failure. In an interview with QTV News, Mr. Mapani says if government was really interested in growing the agricultural sector, all roads in farming areas should have been worked on by now. Mr. Mono is worried that given the bad state of the road is in most rural parts, farmers will find it difficult to access farming inputs for the 2018 to 2019 farming season.
We have seen the fuel prices going up. What this means is the inputs now to get to the rural setups, it will be very costly. The actual price for the fertilizers and seeds will go up. Now the question is, who is going to afford? And these are the guys who have removed the agriculture bursaries, agriculture subsidies. Already, this is a danger to our country. Farmers will not afford. Farmers will not even travel to access these inputs because they have no money.
Labour Minister Joyce Mukoko is concerned over the date and untidiness in most government offices, a situation she says poses a health risk to workers. And the Labour Minister has directed the Workers' Compensation Fund Control Board to ensure that health committees are formed in most institutions to monitor the levels of cleanliness. Mrs. Mukoko says she is irked by the dirtiness that she has found in most institutions during most of her tours, a situation she feels needs to be addressed with utmost seriousness. She states that workers need to work in clean and healthy environments as this contributes to increased productivity. The minister said this when she launched the Workers' Compensation Fund Control Board Vision Zero campaign in Lusaka.
So I want to see improvement at places of work. When I visit places of work, I only find a very clean managing director's office. And when I go into the workers, the offices, it's dirty, it's not airy. One would wonder when it was last swept. And then on Sunday you go to church as the chief executive and kneel before who? Because these are not things. This is a Christian nation. If my office is clean as chief executive, all offices must be clean, must be airy. But not what I'm seeing when we do inspections. We don't want to start exposing you. Let's do what is correct. Workers spend 8 hours at a workplace. 8 hours. When they go home, they go to sleep. So if they are not in a clean environment at a workplace, it's very uncomfortable.
Meanwhile, Ms. Mukoko has noted the need for a paradigm shift at every level of organization, from one of fault finding to that of focusing on solutions to prevent injuries in the workplace. She states that the Vision Zero campaign is a timely intervention which will address this area. And Workers' Compensation Fund Control Board Chief Executive Officer Dr. Elizabeth Nkumbula is optimistic that the Zero Vision campaign is a proactive approach to accident prevention in the workplace. Minister of Health Permanent Secretary for Administration Kennedy Malama says in order to attain better health outcomes for the people, there is need to foster strong and resilient public-private partnerships. Speaking when World Vision handed over medical equipment to the University Teaching Hospital UTH Children's Hospital worth 530,000 kwacha, Dr. Malama says government is making all efforts to improve the health of the people, but that there are still gaps that can be filled through strategic partnerships. He says World Vision International and World Vision Zambia in particular has been a strategic highlight to government in the fight in the health sector in particular. Dr. Malama says that the donation of the medical equipment has come at the right time when the hospital has been given the mandate to stand on its own.
The donation we are getting today is spot on. When you talk of medical equipment and supplies for a hospital like the University Teaching Hospital's Children's Hospital, it's a very, very critical component to ensure that we provide quality health care to our children. We are talking of equipment like blood pressure measuring gadgets, diagnostic sets, among other consumables. So the donation director is just to assure you that it's the right donation we need. More at this time, when this hospital, as you are aware, has been given the mandate to stand on itself. Previously, we just had a university teaching hospital with the various components managed centrally. But now we've given this mandate to senior medical superintendent and his management to run and manage the university teaching hospitals, children's hospital.
Speaking at the same event, World Vision Integrated Program Director Annie Banda says the World Vision acknowledges that government is straining to meet the ever-increasing demand for medical services countrywide. She says it is hoped that the donation will go a long way in making the lives of children as comfortable as possible as they access health services.
Today we are gathered here to witness the donation of medical equipment and other supplies from our cooperating partners throughout Vision Zambia to the Children's Hospital. We acknowledge the fact that government is straining to meet the ever-increasing demand for medical services countrywide, especially in light of the competing needs, and I know that this hospital has not been spared from this challenge. Our prayer and hope as staff from World Vision is that these donations will go a long way in making the lives of children as comfortable as possible as they access medical services. As an organization, we aspire for all children in Zambia to be healthy, educated, and have a strong character. Our current strategic focus is to see measurable and sustainable improvement in the well-being of over 670,000 children countrywide. This donation today is part of this investment in seeing the improvement of the plight of the children. Today,
and UTH Senior Medical Superintendent at the Children's Hospital, Dr. John Masuku, says most of the things that have been donated are things they needed most, but due to budgetary constraints, they were not able to get them.
This morning is another milestone for our hospital PS as we host you and World Vision who have actually come to give us a generous donation of equipment and consumables for this hospital. The equipment and the consumables will go a long way in assisting us to look after these sick children better. And for that, we are really thankful to World Vision. And this relationship is just an initial relationship. It's here, we are going to build on it. And I know as we progress, we are going to receive better things. And I'm proud to announce that most of the equipment that we've received are the things that actually we had planned for. And with budgetary constraints, I think God heard our prayers. This morning,
Government has been challenged to explain clearly what security risk Kenyan academician Patrick Lumumba, who was last Saturday barred from entering Zambia, posed. Social justice activist Howard Banda wants government to be honest and tell the Zambian people why it thought Professor Lumumba could be a security risk if he was allowed to enter the country. Mr. Banda is wondering how a harmless person like Professor Lumumba, who was scheduled to give a public talk, can pose any security risk. In an interview with QTV News, Mr. Banda states that he does not believe Professor Lumumba posed any security risk that can justify his being denied entry into Zambia.
What is wrong for Lumumba to come and speak on a public forum like Eden University? There's nothing wrong with that. We don't see anything wrong. At the end of the day, the government of the day, let us be honest with each other and let them be honest with Zambians. Let them give us a guide on why they were able to act in the way they acted upon the arrival of Mr. Lumumba, the professor himself. How can the harmless person be a security a risk? Is democracy a risk? Is trade a risk? This is a person come to give highlights about Africa and China, yet is given a title of a security risk, a professional for that matter. I think there's need for us Zambians to be very wary of what you are doing. We agree and accept that every illegal immigrant who comes in the country with ill intentions, the government should step in. But in this matter, government has not come out to tell the people the truth. Let us come out with the truth. Why was Lumumba barred to step in the country? Why? The man who came for a good cause. We need to understand the political trade or the bilateral trade of China and Africa. We need to understand that. That's why they're trying to give us counsel and guide on how they come to how the borrowing process has been between China and Zambia. What is wrong?
The Bankers Association of Zambia, BAZ, says all its members have now fully complied with the Bank of Zambia's directive to stop imposing unwarranted bank charges. BAZ, the Chief Executive Officer, Leonard Mwanza, says commercial banks take issues of legal requirement quite seriously and therefore have no choice but to comply with the directive. Mr. Mwanza has told Q News that all banks are displaying all the unwarranted charges the central bank has prohibited in all their branches. Asked what the impact is this prohibition has had on the banking sector so far, Mr. Mwanza says it is too early for the association to make any meaningful assessment. He says the impact can only be known in at least 6 months' time after the association has done an analysis and come up with a position. Mr. Mwanza says the association is, however, having a quiet engagement with the central bank over the prohibited bank charges.
Compliance is not even a question of whether banks should comply or not, because it's a legal requirement. That was a legal notice. And banks take issues of regulatory nature quite seriously. So all the banks are expected to ensure that they've displayed the list of unwarranted charges in all their branches. And also by now, all the banks should have complied with the directive because it's law. The banks have no choice at this stage not to decide to comply or not. It's a legal requirement. They just have to comply in full with this regulation, and we'll wait and see down the line where we'll be.
That item concludes our news, but before we go, here is a recapitulation of stories in the headlines. Government has paid back £2.7 million to the UK government, believed to have been misappropriated at the Ministry of Community Development and Social Welfare. Justice Minister Given Lubinda says the bill to reform the Public Order Act will be presented to Parliament for enactment in February 2019. The Zambia Congress of Trade Unions, ZCTU, has condemned the decision by government to increase fuel prices. That's a wrap. Bye-bye.